everyone, this is Castor and I've got quite a bit to talk about tonight. Let's see if I can get through it all. Um, oh, so just so you know, sometimes I'll be looking over here. I have one desktop computer here and one laptop computer here that's sitting on top of a nightstand. Hopefully, if I'm able to get the industrial machinist job that I'm going to be applying for very soon, actually meeting with my employment specialist tomorrow to talk about going about this. I will, before long, start making some actual livable funds, livable income, and so I'll be able to move and get some better recording equipment, which I seriously do need. But this is okay for now. I can't until I download some better, and it may cost quite a bit more than I can spend right now, some better movie making software. What I had before was on my desktop. I can't really put those videos that I was making out of many different pictures and my voice recording together. So that will have to wait a little while, but I can still make live recordings. And anyone who watches my channel, let me know if you want me to do some live events. I will have to figure out how to schedule them well, but I can certainly start doing so. I've started looking into some ecological issues going on again. So I will touch on more about those. I do have to make videos on just what to do about this Green New Deal, and because I mean, it's idiotic, of course, it would never work. But I did get a new National Geographic magazine today that has quite a few articles on green cities, new ideas for ecological farms and projects within dwelling environments. These are very similar to what you would see in the early 2000s. Some plans for future eco cities, and there's some very interesting articles that I haven't gotten to look over yet because I just got the magazine today, and I was doing my museum volunteering early in the afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to do everything, but I will talk about those. The new National Geographic looks very, very interesting to read about. But until then, I've got some other topics to talk about today. The Mueller report finally came through over the weekend. The full report is not able to be released yet, but we do have the Attorney General William Barr, or Bill Barr's summary and kind of the short report of the lengthy report itself that was put together over 2 years of investigation, from which we heard the media, mainstream media, most of the channels, in particular CNN, nonstop, almost nothing but reports on this Russia collusion, collusion between Trump and Russia to effectively hijack the 2016 American election, which, first of all, at face value, it seems like a really weird assumption and accusation to make of Trump that he colluded with Russia to win the election, since he won so narrowly. If you remember that night, the election night, 2016, November, everyone was at the edge of their seats all night long. I don't think it was called until very early in the morning. I actually made a video titled "The Truth About Trump's Victory" that night, like at 4 in the morning. I was watching the election play out throughout the night with my dad and younger brother, and I remember messages the later that night and the next day, uh, whether so everyone, uh, Republican and Democrat, uh, each had a candidate they were so excited about. Literally, each the supporters of each party all thought the other was the worst possible candidate in the world. Um, I think the Republicans were more correct about Hillary being the worst candidate possible in the world. And I remember through the year of 2016 watching each presidential debate, she, Hillary Clinton meaning, gave, for each question, she gave the most identity politics driven answers that had nothing to do with real solutions you could imagine. Now, prior to 2016, I had been through 4 years of complete medical hell. I was just, as the elections began, earlier that year, um, as the elimination rounds of each party's possible candidate began, and the Republicans had like uh, 16 candidates to begin with, one of them being Trump. I initially didn't want Trump as the next president, but as it gradually narrowed down to him, and he repeatedly proved to be the only Republican candidate willing to slap the Democrats back in the face each time they came with an unjustified accusation or unfair questions. The Republicans were at a point, and the rest of the conservative supporters uh, felt as well, we got to have someone who can punch back. And that eventually proved to be Donald Trump. And particularly as the debates between him and Hillary Clinton progressed throughout the months, uh, Donald Trump gave better and better answers to questions that he was unprepared for. It later turned out Hillary was given the questions beforehand, which is not supposed. The debates are not supposed to be handled that way. But she still completely failed at her answers for anyone who has a quarter of a logical brain. So, and Trump still won very narrowly. So to say to come up with the idea that he stole the election um, seemed to be a really hard case to make from the beginning. But of course, the Democrats all did make that assumption and started shoving it down the rest of our throats. So in my last video, I mentioned that I get most of my news, particularly these days, with which to judge my viewpoint on current world events from mostly two sources, occasionally one or two others here and there, but two that I trust above most others: the Daily Wire and Freedomain Radio. So at the Daily Wire, I'm sure many of you are familiar: Ben Shapiro, Andrew Klavan, Matt Walsh, and Michael Knowles. And Freedomain Radio, the host is Stefan Molyneux. He's a philosopher who has been following international politics for a very long time, has written a good number of books on philosophy and human nature, and in particularly what I really like is his efforts towards peaceful parenting. Many of these books are available for free download at Freedomain Radio. I have a couple of them. I have one about peaceful parenting, and I have universally preferable behavior downloaded right on my computer. I can talk about them sometime, but you can probably go and download them yourself. And if you like what he does, if you check out some of the things he talks about. He has a presence here on YouTube. I should really think about supporting Freedom in Radio. He really is fighting very hard to return reason to the world, which Ben Shapiro and the rest of the people at Daily Wire do as well. As does people like Jordan Peterson, let's see, Dr. Duke Pesta, who is doing a lot of work to reform our approach towards education in an actual rational way. Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson, all people trying to restore reason to the world, and they're not alone, but the ones with enough presence like them are still few and far between, so follow the ones you can find. I've gotten very good information and insight from them all over the past several years, and none from the mainstream media. So if you watch Ben Shapiro's show today, episode 744, he goes through and reads the entire letter from Attorney General William Barr, who summarizes the Mueller report, and kind of, as I said, the report of the report, which finally came out over the weekend. And you can watch the episodes from today of all the others as well at Daily Wire. And the episode, The Truth About the Mueller Report from Stefan Molyneux. I think you should watch all of those. If you can only watch one, that's fine. So this investigation that Robert Mueller put together after Trump fired James Comey, which he had every right in the law to do, was put together over 2 years, consisted of 2,800 subpoenas, 500 investigation warrants, and over 500 witness interviews. That is extremely thorough. My dad, for a time, after he was a professor of electrical engineering, did expert witnessing. For a while, he was a scientific consultant to mostly patent cases on technology and on, I think they call it intellectual property. He did that for a few years. I'm not quite sure how many, but he was subpoenaed quite a few times from the court, so he knows about that. I learned a little bit, never in that much detail, or not much detail about the specific cases he worked on. But 2,800 subpoenas, 500 interviews, that's a hell of a lot. So any news outlet that is trying to say, well, it's not decided, it's not been thorough, it's bullshit. That is about as thorough as you could probably get in a case like this. I literally don't know what more they could have done. Went through every record, every piece of evidence they could get their hands on, and there were a couple of interesting points. And Ben Shapiro and Andrew Cleveland, Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, they have their episodes talking about this in much more details about how the legal system works than I can, because I was not trained as a lawyer. I was trained as an ecologist. Oh, well, I say trained. Mostly I had to learn the bulk of my knowledge through self-teaching and through improvising ways to do school projects and papers, because the classes themselves actually don't teach that much. So there's two interesting points I can talk about. One is the report is that Mueller, through all of his investigations, all of his interviews and subpoenas, found no evidence whatsoever of collusion with Russia. There's an interesting little thing at the end that says can't reach a final conclusion on obstruction of justice, but in this case, All that means is Trump says a lot of foolish things. He says good things, he says bad things, he says things that make it look like he's trying to discourage or shut down investigations. There was the time when he was giving the State of the Union address a couple months ago and said everything will, something like everything will improve as long as there's no investigations. That I, I mean, I understand how he feels. He's probably just exasperated with the investigations, as are a lot of us. Um, but in terms of just how that appears, that wasn't good. So he'll occasionally say things like that. And he is just a beast on Twitter, of course, and not always an intelligent beast. But in this case, not reaching a final conclusion on obstruction of justice when there has been this much investigation really means that they've found nothing they can go ahead and prosecute with. Absolutely nothing. And so there's been two polarized attitudes towards Donald Trump. On the left, the Democrats, the social justice, I really don't want to call them warriors. I get why people do, because they act violently and they shut down events that they have no right to shut down whatsoever. Yeah, they always accuse of speech inciting violence while they're threatening serious physical violence. But the thing about warriors is warriors in a society are, if you want to get to the actual predominant historical definition of the term warrior, it is a class, not, it is a class or a group of people in any given society whose occupation, whose role in that society it is to wage the wars they have to wage, fight the military battles to protect that society. So soldiers, actual military, would be warriors. Social justice warriors, I actually call social justice losers. But people like that, them, the left, the mainstream media, because they're pretty much all leftists, with a couple of exceptions, but mostly it's the independent people like Molyneux and the Daily Wire, who are the exceptions. Leftists, Democrats, hate Trump's guts. They have wanted him impeached since day one, and they have outright said it. I mean, they have not fooled anyone about where exactly they stand. Now, Trump supporters, so there's two kinds of Trump supporters, mostly. There are the Trump supporters who are most like the people at the Daily Wire. They will praise him when he does good things. They have very much warmed up to him as he has governed very conservatively, although the wall still isn't being built. We've got to find a new strategy towards border security, because I think the Republicans have pretty much given up on this, which, of course, they should have built the wall when they had a Republican Congress. I have repeatedly expressed frustration that they didn't. And Molyneux has videos on why they probably didn't. Why they probably didn't is two reasons. One, they probably do want the cheap labor that is coming in from migrants, and so they're willing to let that slide when they really shouldn't. And the other thing is, they want to keep some workers coming in to support an economy that is still largely unsustainable. If you're still in financial even remotely okay shape, should really be putting some money away and stocking up resources for an economic collapse. Another one will come, and I really do fear that the next one's going to be um, pretty extreme because we've built up so much national debt. It's just probably going to collapse like a house of cards. No, I've not watched that show. Probably should. I'm just I just have so much to do. Uh, and so the current administration, the current Congress people don't want to be they keep hoping the people in the next government will be the ones to collapse, to be seen as having collapsed the country when it's actually gonna hit another economic collapse eventually anyway. But of course, the government is never seen in a good light when the economy does collapse, unless they come to you with a promise that they can fix it all if you just give it up your freedoms, and that has really got to be watched out for and fought at every turn, because we've seen what happens when countries do that. They descend into tyrannical dictatorship like that after you give up all your power to the government. This is why pro-gun advocates and activists say, don't let the government disarm you. Don't do it. Then we are completely vulnerable. So these are the two reasons that Republicans have probably kind of that make the most sense as to why Republicans have given up on border security. Although, other than that, Trump has largely rebuilt the economy and rebuilt the military, both of which are good. If only we had security as well. It's another issue. We'll touch more upon that in another video. So, where was I? Oh, yes. So, two types of Trump supporters. So there's the type that praises him when he does good stuff, calls him out when he makes stupid mistakes. I've done that. And then there's and those people will also think he's generally been good, as I just kind of described. Though do have some things some behaviors of his that he wish he'd really learned to control. Although I do recognize, in your 70s, as Trump is, you're really not likely to change your ways. So he is what he is, and I think we all by now understand who he is. And then there's the other main type of Trump supporter who thinks he. I don't want to go quite so far as to say can do no wrong, but think that anytime he slips up is permissible because he's far better than any other option. Not really the case. I haven't seen another candidate yet who I would prefer, because on the Republican side, they're either too cowardly to take the stands that Trump has taken, and on the Democratic side, they're all batshit insane. So it does kind of leave us between. It leaves American voters in a really tough position. And of course, if Trump wins in 2020, well, I mean, he can only stay in office another 4 years anyway. So eventually, we're going to have someone after Trump, and I do worry about who's going to come after Trump, whether it's in 2020 or 2024. But I think Ben Shapiro once put it like, there's the people who really need to stop believing that he's playing 20-dimensional, upside-down, hungry hippos, space wizard chess. Although he might be playing normal version of Hungry Hungry Hippos with his mile-high stacks of burgers in the White House. But the idea that the mainstream media, and as I said, CNN in particular, has been shoving down our throats for the past 2 years, a little longer than that actually right after the night he won, which was in November of 2016, that Donald Trump and his administration, or at least someone in his circle of family and or allies, conspired with the Russian government to influence and ultimately determine the 2016 United States presidential election. All the time. Story after story after story after story based on very shaky rumors to begin with, and always saying that the next little shred of information is going to be the next bombshell that will lead to instant impeachment, or at least that's kind of the atmosphere they portrayed about it. Not quite 2.5 years, but almost 2.5 years, nonstop, all the time. A lot of my family watches the CNN and Rachel Maddow and others all the time. Bought it hook, line, and sinker. Trump colluded with Russia. Oh my God! And then month after month after month, nothing would be found. More evidence that nothing would be found, and then, more indication that it was nothing but a waste of time. And then last year, the information came out about a document called the Steele dossier, a packet of documents. A dossier is just a collection of documents put together by made-up rumors, as it all started, by Democrat connections in Russia, not conservative, but Democrat connections in Russia, about making up stories about Trump connections and just story about Trump. Its creation paid for by Hillary Clinton. This document, paid for by Hillary Clinton, was presented by the then FBI Director James Comey and presented as legitimate evidence to apply for a Foreign Intelligence Survey Act. They went to the Foreign Intelligence Survey Act courts, the FISA courts, to get a warrant on Carter Page and the Trump administration for surveillance on them. They lied to the FISA courts, bringing this document of bullshit evidence, all made up, telling the courts that it was legitimate, that it was looked over, reviewed, and verified to get wiretaps and surveillance on the Trump administration. And when that came out, there should have been I'm not an expert in how the legal system at this level works, but a lot more questions about the origins of this requested investigation into stories about collusion should have been asked right then and there. Now, Mueller took over the investigation. Robert Mueller, this new Attorney General, took over the investigation. Trump didn't like it, but he allowed it to go forward. He really didn't get in Mueller's way upon Mueller taking on the investigation. We were all frustrated. Of course, we were all frustrated because routinely nothing was being found. And all waiting for it to just finish. It finally finished, and lo and behold, They found nothing. People investigating, a lot of them not particularly fond of Trump. Um, nothing to nothing to build a case for collusion upon. I mean, nothing whatsoever. So, as Republicans and conservatives, and there is a difference. I've spoken about the difference before, but uh, so people on the right who want a return to conservative values and life in America, which, quite honestly, America could really use, had long suspected because the Democrats and the mainstream media, um, effectively, they're the same thing. Uh, well, I mean, they're in so much bed together that I'm not even sure if you could separate the beast with two backs at that point. But okay. um, I mean, they made no secret of their extreme hatred for Trump. So, I mean, we've all suspected that this was uh, completely made up from the beginning. And now we have about as final proof as you possibly could get on a story like this. This is about as decided as you're ever going to get. Now, they can't come up with the full document. They can't just PDF it and release it to the public right away. They do have to go through the judicial process of deciding what's okay to publish and what's not. But we have the scope of the findings, and there's no case. There's no case for any prosecution, let alone impeachment. So if the mainstream media and if the Democrats don't drop this, if they continue to push for more investigations, Trump has every right in the world to say, okay, I gave you as much opportunity and as much time as you wanted to take to investigate this. Mueller came up with nothing. I didn't like it, but I let the investigation go on. Now you're just trying to continue this story to spite me. There's every right to say that because now that's incontrovertible. Now, Stefan Molyneux, in his Truth About the Mueller Investigation video, will talk about that there's actually a secondary motive for doing this. And it's literally to put the American people's push for and the Trump administration's demand for immigration control to a standstill. Literally to waste everyone's time. Filibuster. Well, I don't think it's called filibuster. And so there's a process where you can delay a bill being put through the courts, and effectively that's what happens. That's what's happening now. They're trying to load the government down and the people's time and money and efforts down with pointless made up investigations, so that we literally can't put as much effort into solutions that we want. So that we can't make any more progress on that. I'm not sure what to call that, if not treason. It's certainly obstruction. And it's pathetic, and it's evil, and it is a complete callousness and disregard towards the wishes of the American people, which, when the American people are polled, and when, honestly, at this point, citizens across Western countries are actually polled, They want a lot more immigration control. And governments all over the place just not listening. So, so, so let's briefly talk about New Zealand. So we've all, at this point, I think, heard about uh, the massacre that this white supremacist. Although I do want to, at some point, go into the difference between a white nationalist and a white supremacist into detail. Basically, there is a difference. The difference is a white nationalist um, holds that white people are going to need a nation of their own because they're under so much assault and slander all over the world, not just from minorities, but from governments using uh, the narrative of difference in economic outcome to literally divide and conquer people and win and overwhelm white votes, which tend to be more conservative, with ethnic minority votes, which tend to vote Democrat, and literally overwhelm any um, conservative movements in conservative and nationalist movements in their governments. We know that is going on. So white nationalists believe that hold that because of that, and you know, after looking at what's going on in South Africa, I can't exactly blame them that much. Holds that white people are going to need a country of their own, a Poland or an Israel, for as is for the Jewish people. Although there are people of other faiths living in Israel, and a white supremacist is exactly what it sounds like: someone who believes that white people are the supreme race, effectively um, taking this. And this is the group that can go to the Nazi extreme. Uh, White nationalists are a whole other category. Now, you can be both at once, but not necessarily. That's not always the case, and I think that's actually less and less the case. So it was a supremacist who went and um, slaughtered 50 people at 2 mosques. Although, to comment on the migration of large, well, at least significant Muslim populations into Western countries, and Australia and New Zealand are British Commonwealth countries, so they are Western culture countries, even though they're in the southeastern quarter sphere. Uh, Australia and New Zealand is this little island. That's actually not that little. It's way out to the west of Australia and to the east, southeast of Hawaii. So these significant Muslim populations that form their own geographical communities in these Western countries, invited by the governments of those countries. And this does look to be part of a government effort, to a leftist government effort to gradually overwhelm the white voting population. I actually do see a connection there. Um, and this would make it government sanctioned invasions. So when someone calls it an invasion, they're not exactly that mistaken. In any case, New Zealand's response was completely reactionary, completely irresponsible, completely insane. First is trying a gigantic gun buyback. They tried that in Australia. Only 1/3 of the guns were returned to the government, as, you know, shouldn't have even been 1/3. if you hand over your arms to the government, you have nothing to fight back with when the government becomes tyrannical. This is what happened with the Jews and the Nazis in the Holocaust. And of course, the Jews weren't the only population that the Nazis genocided. There were also homosexuals, black people, intellectuals, because they didn't want anyone um, intellectually challenging the Nazi doctrine. Disabled people. So it was a whole range. It wasn't just the Jews that genocided, but the first thing the Nazis did when they took power, well, one of the first things, was to disarm the population. And then what happened? Well, we know what happened next. Now, I completely disapprove of Angela Merkel's efforts to destroy Germany today. I mean, Germans in this generation aren't responsible for what happened a generation or two before they were even born. And this idea of inherited guilt for past atrocities that Westerners supposedly have. How often, when you were in school, if you live in the West, when you were in school, I bet there certainly was for me, a long progression of history courses talking about the Native American genocide, which is a lot more complicated than it is usually portrayed as. And it wasn't. I mean, they had been conquering each other for thousands of years. It's really not. I'm getting into topics that are too complicated for me to do tonight, but I'll talk about that some other time. Actually, Molyneux has a video on this too. But the atrocities done by the white people to the Native Americans, again, not as clear cut in actual history as history classes portray it. Enslavement of the blacks, the marginalization of, well, any group they'll pick. This is why everything is so anti-white people these days, is because there are efforts by leftist governments to only portray them as the enemy. And this, very understandably, is getting a lot of white people really sick and, let me clarify, not getting them sick and tired of it. We've been sick and tired of it for quite some time. How much detail did these history classes ever go into the Armenian genocide carried out by Muslims against white Christian Armenians? Or the Muslim African slave trade? How often do they talk about the Rotherham and Telford scandals? How often do they talk about the fact that the reason there was a slave trade from Africa in the first place was because the black tribes were selling off the people they captured in warfare and through raids to other people like the Europeans, like the Muslims, like other blacks. I had it vaguely mentioned a couple times, but barely any emphasis put on it, barely any detail, certainly, and so it does get really frustrating to be, for white people to be held to a standard that of not only behavior, but of expectations of regret and demands for reparation that no other demographic is being asked for, is being asked of. So New Zealand tried to reply with, so when the massacre at the mosques, took place, which I'm struggling with exactly how to perceive it. Um, I can't tell you that something like this wasn't coming. When governments force, when governments put people that there is uh, racial or religious tension together and then fuel that tension. What do you think is gonna? Where do you think it's gonna lead? What do you think is gonna happen at some point? It's the government you need to watch out for gaining power. But people for a long time have been perfectly willing to just keep handing the government lots of power. It's it's going to lead to some real tragedies in the past in the next, I don't know if it's 1 century or multiple centuries, but it's not looking good. The one thing good about living in America is we have a few more protections around our freedoms than places like even Canada and Australia, New Zealand, and the UK do. But if there is a complete leftist takeover of the government, as Hillary and Obama tried to do, with Obama caused massive damage during his presidency, and Hillary would have finished the takeover had she gotten elected. And I think the so Trump's base rallied around him because he was the only one with enough guts and enough enough of I don't give a shit. I am not playing your political correctness game gumption to stand up to that and actually succeed at standing up to that. So, I mean, you want to know why Trump won the election is because enough people said, okay, we are in serious danger here. Americans said, this country is on a serious cliff's edge, and if we don't stop the leftists right now, there may never be another chance. And this is why I think people all over the world were sensing this too, even the ones who had a lot of problems with the would-be President Trump. A lot of them still recognize that this battle between a rock and a hard place, and actually Trump's proven to be quite okay. There are a few things I wish he wouldn't do, but I mean I could talk all night about that. But there does come a time where you really have to make a decision that's going to determine the course of the rest of your country, at least for a very long time. And in 2016, we faced that question like I never thought I would face in my lifetime. So I was born in 1985. I know I look considerably younger than that, but that's because my development has been so delayed that I another story for a whole another time. But um, and bodily, physically delayed as well. I'm talking about that some other time. But um, so growing up, I saw uh, an occasional debate of which president or which politician is better than which. I remember a little bit of the Clinton controversy, although I was in what was that? I'm trying to remember exactly. We're talking what I'd been about 10 at the time, so I didn't get much detail. Um, After that, I would hear a few things here and there. Um, in 2008, I, like many people, gave Barack Obama a chance. He proved to be a complete disaster. I did not vote for him in 2012. I voted for Mitt Romney, but Obama and the Democrats were just absolutely horrible to Mitt Romney. Um, so 2016 was the time to make a real choice. And when Hillary Clinton played the social justice identity politics bullshit, I knew she had to be stopped, and I think a lot of other people did too. And it's been really frustrating over the past almost 2.5 years. Um, Trump was inaugurated into, I think they run. Well, Trump was actually entered into office in 2017, but he wins the election the night in November 2016. So yeah, almost 2.5 years we've been hearing about this Russia collusion shit, and now to be confirmed that it's been a giant waste of time. Not to mention, remember about the government, it doesn't have its own money. All the money that it spends is either the taxpayers' money or the money that they're hoping future generations are going to pay. Um, I think the future generations have every right to be totally pissed off that the national debt is so high, because that's their money that's going to have to pay it, unless the country just completely collapses and maybe Yellowstone erupts, in which case the survivors of that will really have to start completely over. But who knows? In November this year, I gave a talk about volcanoes and supervolcanoes to the Geological Society, and I promise when I have some new recording equipment, when I get the money to pay for that, buy that, I will put a copy of my presentation on volcanoes and supervolcanoes. I think it went really well when I gave it to the Geological Society. But doing the research for it, I found that the Yellowstone supervolcano erupting is actually not a huge concern over the next couple 100,000 years. At least it's on a 600 to 800,000 year cycle, so we could easily be looking at another 150,000 years before it erupts. Don't know. But unless there's some truly global disaster that really does reset everything, and I kind of hope there won't be, because I'm not sure we could recover from anything at this point, given how insane the world is. But that not happening does mean we'll have to deal with the effects of all this ridiculous national debt that not only America, but every government around the world is racking up. It's chaos. So, if the mainstream leftist media tries to keep running with the Trump-Russia collusion story now, it's, in one way or another, it's got to be all over for them, because they have lied and lied and lied and led us on a wild goose chase of lies and lies and lies over the past 2.5 years. I'm just so exasperated and frustrated with it that I mean, then there's no hope for them ever being viewed as objective again, except by the people who have already made up their minds to be anti-Trump no matter what. But I mean, that's just pathetic. Even the most right-leaning conservatives, Republicans, gave Barack Obama a chance, but he failed that chance. and did truly apocalyptic times more harm than good. Uh, and so we needed Trump, and we still need Trump. The question is, who's going to come after Trump? That's something we're going to have to talk about for a while. And I did have more subjects I wanted to talk about tonight, but I haven't been able to summarize them in. I haven't been able to summarize each topic in a brief amount of time, so this is going to have to be the end for tonight. I will talk to you again tomorrow, or in the next couple days. I will be watching the Daily Wire, see what comes to pass. And so I think I'm gonna sign up for tonight. This is Castor Raptorial, and we will talk later.